Well, welcome back to our Future Shock film focus here in the Special Topics in Media Studies class. Future Shock is what we could consider a subgenre of science fiction film, and we are working through a journey of features to help determine what are the parameters of Future Shock. What does it look like? What is it made of? And how can we better understand its values and perhaps relate them at some point down the line to the real world and real conditions in which we live. Now that can be part of the both challenge and distancing part of science fiction film, but it also can represent the inviting elements. Sometimes the things that create concern for us or perhaps drum up anxieties are just too real to deal with. And so science fiction historically represents a space where these types of extreme ideas can play out in a fantasy realm in a way that is more comforting as opposed to concerning for us. And by that, we may have real world implications as we ruminate on those themes. Well, this week, we have what I would consider a pair of dueling dystopias from which we will choose one. And for those active in the online course, this is going to be a choose your own adventure option. And for those in class, we'll practice civic democracy here and eliminate one and elect the other. But let me set up these two films, and then I really want to parlay that into some commonalities between each, with some special emphasis on the second feature here. So the first film that is spotlighted for this mid-course point for us is WALL-E. WALL-E was released by Pixar Studios in 2008. Now, Pixar part of the Disney brand at this point in time, but there was a point in time where Pixar kind of worked as not unlike a subgenre. They were a sublet, right? They were kind of a leasing factory for innovative, creative animation that was driving new directions and bringing in wide audiences. Well, 2008 and WALL-E's release represented one of their boldest strokes. In addition to films such as Toy Story, Bug's Life, Finding Nemo, and the like, WALL-E's going to come along and tell a much more of a concerned parable about what could be in a world down the line. It's a future shock emphasis on not only artificial intelligence, but how they might not simply replicate some of the elements that make us human, but replace us if things go astray. Well, that's at the heart of WALL-E, directed by Stanton. And on the other hand, we have, in addition to Andrew Stanton's WALL-E, Stanton, a director of several Pixar films, a writer of even more of them, we have the film Oblivion that's going to release about 5 years later. Oblivion's directed by Joseph Kosinski, and Kosinski has fewer films under his belt, but he's quickly making a name for himself with pristine and immaculate visual style. And so he's a stylist as a director. I'm positive if you haven't seen Oblivion, you've heard of or likely seen one of his other films. The first that brought him onto the scene and got him onto the radar of this film's producers is Tron Legacy. Tron Legacy, a kind of future-focused film in its own right, was what we call a legacy sequel, right? It's right there in the title, but a sequel to the early 1980s film Tron, which at its time was an innovator in visual animation. Not so much now in retrospect, but it has a kind of vibe that people like and connect with a certain age and a certain technological association. Well, fast forward to 2010, and Tron Legacy. It's not going to quite capture audience attention. It's not going to be the monster hit that Disney wanted, but it does update the visual vibe in exciting ways. And so that's going to help get Kosinski onto the project of Oblivion. And then eventually, through that experience with the film star, Tom Cruise, they're going to pair up again now that in his, say, later phases of stardom, Cruise is now known to be a performer that prefers to collaborate frequently with the same storytellers. And he's going to employ Kaczynski several years later in a film that many thought was bringing audiences back to movie theaters following the pandemic experience that we encountered. And that film is Top Gun Maverick. And so if you've seen that, which was a mega hit when it came out, Top Gun Maverick, exceptional visuals and attention to visual storytelling and style. And you're going to see that in Oblivion, he pays careful attention to those same details. Well, let's talk about those details and associate them with our science fiction and future shock themes. So once again, a reminder of our core reads. We're looking at Alvin Toffler's Future Shock from early 1970s. Much more recent, in fact, released this year. Come With Me If You Want to Live, book from Michael Harris, The Future as Foretold in Classic Sci-Fi Films, and Keith M. Johnson's science fiction film, A Critical Introduction from Bloomsbury Press. And between these, we've isolated a couple of different chapters to just help us along with our momentum. One's a carryover from last week when we screened I Am Legend. We feel like the Coping with Tomorrow theme, that chapter from Toffler, resonates on the screen with these pair of features last week and this week, as well as The Modular Man. The Modular Man, and we're definitely considering a film like Oblivion when we consider what is this Modular Man that Toffler is theorizing about, and does or doesn't it fit the mold here? Well, in Come With Me, there is a nice chapter, chapter 5, in fact, that we've earmarked for consideration this week. This chapter is not about either of these films, but that's kind of the fun here. Now we're introducing certain styles of writing, different styles, in fact, but from the Harris book. These are case studies in film, and so looking ahead and remembering what's on deck for us in a course experience. We have an analysis paper at the end of the class where we're putting films in conversation together. So you can consider along the way that these examples from the Harris book are doing the same kind of business. And actually, the later unit of the Johnston book that focuses on decades of science fiction film, you can think about each one of those decade-focused chapters as doing a much larger version of what we can accomplish through our analysis paper. But chapter 5 of Come With Me If You Want to Live is titled Your Future Comfort is Assured. How the corporate-controlled utopia of Rollerball isn't as content as it appears. Rollerball, of course, is a future shock sci-fi film from the mid-1970s. It stars James Caan in a world in which the spectacle of professional sport has gone to violent, nay, ultra-violent extremes. And he plays a performer in that sport who's grappling with identity crisis amidst a suffocating sense of impending influence from corporate governance. And so it has some thematic carryover, but of course that's a bit of a chore for us to find. And so let's consider these future shock themes that we can walk down in consideration with either of this week's features. The first that I've earmarked would be genetic engineering. There's a bit of genetic engineering when we consider what it means to flee into the future. Wall-E is a distant, far-flung future in which it presents a dystopian potentiality, and Oblivion is a film set in 2077. 2077, in which an somewhat eradicated Earth is being essentially mined by some remnants that remain, right? For which our key character is a part of what we could equate to IT, right? He's working maintenance to keep the drones in active order as they survey what's left of Earth's resources. Well, next in that note, we have technology and science altering behavior. And as we can imagine, right, for a moment, the potentiality when technology and science continue to progress forward, what are the outcomes? What are the consequences? And what does it mean to essentially pivot from existing as humans to perhaps becoming transhuman? What is a transhuman experience? And on that front, there is a dueling tension at play in each of these films between what we could consider utopic technologies and dystopian or dystopic realities. Finally, one that I added to help draw us back to the language of Toffler is tensions between stability versus transience. Transience is a term that Toffler writes about early on in the book, and when we think about ways to analyze texts, one of the convenient methods in close reading can be comparison and contrast between oppositional themes. And so we would find in each of these features a tension between stability of roles and labor, versus transience, what it means to sense a calling to mobility in a new type of form or fashion. Well, let's look at some film focus components to be on the lookout as we consider either of these selections this evening. The first would be futuristic mise en scène. Now, mise en scène is a French term ascribed by film critics to essentially describe all of the components that go into a production, particularly those elements that could be visual, stage effects, props, setting, scene, that pull together to envelop the audience within the world of the storytelling. So futuristic mise en scène. Haunting reveries. Now, reverie could be a new term for some of us, but a reverie is essentially a kind of daydream, a kind of memory, if not a potential nightmare, right? Hence this suggestion of haunting reveries. What does it mean when we look back on the past or look back on experience and have this confliction between positive and negative emotion? Well, we actually have something kind of like that. We call it nostalgia, but nostalgia tends to filter out the negative in favor of only the positive, whereas reveries might be a little bit more ubiquitous and inviting there. Imagining future pasts is our next category to be on the lookout for, and there's intentional wordplay with that, right? What is it to imagine future past? That is to say, what a future purported past looks like on the silver screen, and these films do just that. And then I'm going to add a couple of teasers to be on the lookout for. The first would be dystopian doppelgangers, right? So we're getting some juicy kernels here dropped this week. A doppelganger, and now we could get into several categories of this, but what does it mean to kind of have a shadowed other, right? A mirrored version of oneself even. What does that imply? What does it look like? And how do we grapple with that? And then finally, magnificent desolation. These are two incredibly beautiful films that present tranquil devastation in terms of their future projections. And so consider that level of magnificent desolation and what it suggests, what it reveals versus what it questions about our own time and our own status quo and what that implies. So we'll be watching among these films here, and we're looking forward to having conversation afterward, keying in those discussions, and then looking forward to week 4.